Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Rabbi Gellman, my dear, dear friend and colleague. And today, New Year's Day, is Shabbos, and this is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning. Marc, good morning and Happy New Year's.
Hey, may old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind.
Never
Oh,
brought to mind. So we hope everyone's had a wonderful New Year's Eve and
yeah.
has gotten up early this morning to do a little Torah study with us. It's a wonderful way to begin the new year. This morning, we read from the second Torah portion in the book of Exodus. It's the second of a four-part telling of the story of our enslavement in Egypt, the birth of Moses, and the beginning of the process of our liberation, of our redemption. At the end of last week's Torah portion, the end of Shmot, it ends on a sort of really depressing note. Having gone to Pharaoh and demanded he liberate the Israelites, Pharaoh then doubles the workload on the Israelites, and the Israelites come back to Moses with the complaint, "We told you so. This is why we told you not to make trouble." It's the complaint that every radical hears. If you want to read it in American literary history, read Letter from the Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King, who was roundly condemned by the ministers, including the Black ministers of the South, as he rallied particularly young Black African-American people for their own civil rights. And the response was, "Don't make trouble, you'll only make it worse." And
Yeah.
Moses is depressed. He's despondent by this and goes back to God and he says, "Why did you send me? Why did you disturb my life? Why did we upset the life of this people? Why did we make this so much worse? Where is your power of liberation? You told me you were the liberating God." And at this moment, something remarkable happens. And you see this punctuating the story of the Exodus. Throughout the story of the Exodus, there are these moments of personal religious revelation, personal religious experience that Moses experiences. Last week, standing at the burning bush, he says to God, "When I go to the Israelites, they're going to ask me, 'What's your name?' What's your name?" And it's a very strange question if you think about it, because what he's asking them is, they know something I don't know because I didn't go to Hebrew school. And they're going to want to know what the secret handshake is. They're going to want to know what the secret name of God is. So it's his, and it's even a deeper question, because what he's really asking is, you're the God of this people, and they've been enslaved for 280 years. Where have you been? What kind of God are you? What does it mean to be a God? And if this is a people that came from Canaan, and in that world, gods were felt to be local, what are you doing out here in the middle of the Sinai desert? Who are you? What kind of God are you? And what kind of God liberates slaves? Gods stand with kings and with nobility. Gods don't stand with slaves. It was an interesting question last week. The same thing is going to happen in a couple of weeks again when we get to the 32nd chapter to talk about the golden calf. And once again, there's going to be this question. Moses is going to say to God, "Who are you? Show me who you are. Show me what you're made of." In this particular Torah portion, Moses' despondency, his depression, his disillusionment with the whole process of liberation incites God to say to him, "Let me tell you my personal name. My name is Yud Hey Vav Hey. I am this God that was, is, and always will be. I never revealed that to your ancestors. I called myself El Shaddai, the God of protection, if you will. But now this is a moment when you need to know me, and the people need to know me, and I need to show you who I am." The process of liberation is, in fact, a process of revelation, or is to say, we come to know God through the experiences of life. It's not so much that a light turns on in your coat closet and the Lord God speaks to you, but in the course of experience, in the course of struggling with life, in the course of meeting adversity, in the course of dealing with tragedy, in the course of embracing simcha, embracing celebratory moments, we come to have a sense that the universe is more than simply the physical interaction of molecules, that there's something else, that there is an aspect we call spirit, an aspect of divinity that lives with us in the world. And that's what's being spoken about in this in this story. This moment is a moment when Moses begins to discover the religion that he's going to be teaching to his people. So, Marc, good morning.
Hey,
Talk to me about
that
coming
sounds
to know
good.
God through experience.
Well, I like that. I think it's beautiful, brilliant, and true. And in philosophy, there's two theories of truth. One is correspondence, and one is coherence. In the correspondence theories of truth, it means that a name like Sam or Joe or Eddie or Mark, they correspond to something in the real world that is the name is the thing in the world, corresponds. But there's another theory of truth, which is coherence, which means the name isn't about something that exists in the world. The name is about a process that exists in the world that makes the world work. And that's what, if you dig this out of the Torah, which was not a philosophical document, but if you realize that it's also the word of God, which I believe in this way, that it's a story of God teaching Moses about, you can find me in the process of the world and how the world works and coheres. I am the glue of the world. And it's interesting that the name is 4 letters, Yod He Vav He. And it's also interesting that this week, E.O. Wilson, the great biologist, the sociobiologist, the entomologist, the Ant-Man of Harvard, he died at age 92, and he was sort of the heir to Darwin. And Darwin had this theory, and Wilson developed it, that basically there is in our genes the evolutionary capacity to adapt to the world in ever more perfect ways. And the way we adapt is also with 4 letters. ACTG, adenine, cytosine, thymine, guanine, the 4 amino acids that make up the links of the deoxyribonucleic acid of DNA. So there's a real midrash there of the 4 letters, which don't make sense anyway, the way they're put in, but they make sense once you interpret them. So now the question is, if God is the process of the world, what does that mean? How does that work? Well, what that means is that God establishes a world that allows us to participate in the struggle for greater freedom and life and hope and peace, kindness, goodness, all the values of the Torah. And we are partners in that quest. But the laws of how we can actually succeed in that quest are laid down in the Torah. For Darwin and for Wilson, religion is not necessary because evolution carries with it all the processes we need to adapt. And in fact, what made Wilson so controversial back in the mid-70s when he first invented sociobiology and taking basically the laws of evolutionary biology and applying them to human beings and human culture. What he said is, to grossly simplify his theory here, said, look, take something like courage. You think, or free will. That's your human nature. Your priests and rabbis and ministers and imams, they teach you about that. That's not true. What's true is this: if you in the old world with the prehistoric man and the saber-toothed tigers, if the tiger is attacking a group, and if one group has the capacity to cohere and to defend itself against the tiger, and they form a circle with their spears and they poke the tiger when he attacks, then they have an evolutionary bias, a better chance to survive than the group filled with selfish people who all run their own way each their own way, and the saber-toothed tiger takes time and just tracks them down and eats them one by one. So that's sort of his proof that courage is not anything about God or the Torah or anything. It's about evolution. So what we have here in our Torah portion and in Wilson's life and work is a choice. The choice is, are we simply material beings governed by the laws of genetics and evolution? Or is there something in us, Tselem Elohim, image of God, some transcendent essence that we have that isn't physical, that isn't material, that is the reason why when our bodies die, something goes on and lives in the world to come in heaven, which is true. And that is the great challenge to religion. Wilson was the most formidable opponent to religion in our time, and Darwin began it all. The question of materialism versus a kind of spiritualism. Now, when he was at Harvard, there was a paleontologist who was actually a friend of Wilson's, but an opponent intellectually. His name was Stephen Jay Gould. And Gould had the theory of what's called NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. I apologize to our listeners if this is a little bit too complex, or in the weeds, but humor me a minute. So what he said to Wilson was, look, you're wrong. You're wrong. What is true is that religion has its domain and science has its domain, and they don't overlap. Science tells you what the world is like. Religion tells you what the world means. And science can't tell you what the world means because it's just materialistic. And religion can't tell you how the world works. And that's the truth of things. So there's ways to harmonize the materialistic and the transcendental, but it's very, very deep thinking and very complicated. And it all begins with this week's Torah portion.
Wow. So help me understand this. So Wilson's theory is that the ethics that we associate with the best of human beings, the ethics we would call that are the essence of soul, that these are really social expressions of evolution that gave advantages to certain genetic combinations in human beings and are therefore encoded in our genes.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a courage gene, a virtue gene, a goodness gene, a tuck your kids in at night gene. There's everything that you think is spiritual isn't. Mm-hmm. It's a gene. Now, no one's ever found these genes, a certain problem for the theory, but the theory still stands. People didn't find DNA until Watson and Crick discovered it. So
let's step back for just a second, because I want to put this in context. There's a wonderful context to this, which I think would be worth taking just a moment to notice, right?
Sure.
Right? So in the beginning, in the Middle Ages, the church adopted and advocated a cosmology that was offered by the Egyptian astronomer Ptolemy, which put the Earth in the middle of everything and spheres of planets and other things going around the Earth. So the cosmology of Ptolemy, the sense of the universe that Ptolemy taught, corresponded with the sense of the Bible, in which the Earth is the center of God's attention and human beings, of course, created in God's image. Then comes along Copernicus and Galileo. And Copernicus and Galileo give us a universe in which the Earth is not the center, the physical center of the universe. Rather, we are in the outskirts we are in the suburbs of the Milky Way galaxy, which is made up of 100 million stars, and which is one of 100 million galaxies. And we're no better than the third planet around a middle-sized, mediocre yellow star called the sun. And the church had a terrible time with this, burned many at the stake, condemned Galileo, and eventually they were forced to accept it because it made sense in a certain way. And the church and religion in general, the church I'm using as religion in general, came to accept it and said, well, okay, so cosmologically, we may not be the center of the universe, but after all, we're a very special place, this Earth planet. And we human beings, we are a very special species. We still are created in the image of God. And then comes along your friend Darwin. And Darwin says, well, not exactly. Human beings are simply highly evolved primates, at the end of a process of evolution, an ongoing process of evolution. And we are simply the ultimate expression of primates. Evolution continues, and eventually we'll be displaced by something that's better off than we are. And again, the church had a terrible time with this. And then finally, religion had a terrible time with Darwin. And finally, they came to accept Darwin, those who did. Not all of them do, of course, but those who did. And finally, they said, well, that's the body of the human being, but the spirit of the human being reflects the presence of God in the soul. And then comes along Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx, a couple of Jews, right? And Freud says, no, as a matter of fact, the inner life of a human being is a battle between two forces, the force that pushes us toward death and the force that pushes us toward sex, right? The id is this battleground. And between sex and death, you will sublimate and you create all of human culture. And Marx comes along and says all of human culture and all of human ethics is simply a superstructure for the powerful to lord it over the weak. And once again, the church says, my God, the spirit of human beings is determined by its biology. The body of the human is determined by biology. The cosmology of the universe is, and we keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And you can feel the protest of the church or religion, as it were. I'm just using the church as a model, trying to hold on to something that makes us unique. Comes along Edwin Wilson, who studies ants. He's the world's leading expert on ants. And he points out all the ways in which we're just like ants, that those behaviors which gave advantages in our evolution are the ones that are coded in our genetics. So altruism, compassion, empathy, all these wonderful things that we teach in Hebrew school are actually genetic expressions of evolutionary advantage behaviors. And so once again, religion protests. So the question mark is, once you've displaced us from the center of the universe, once you've just made the body an expression of physical biology, of evolution, once you've made the human spirit into something that is biologically determined, what's left? Where is the domain then of spirit or the uniqueness of the human being? What's left to take pride in as a human being? Where do you find meaning in human life?
Right. Well, I think we're at the edge of the cliff. And the battle, the final battle, is over one word: freedom. Freedom of the will. If we have it, Darwin is wrong, Wilson was wrong. We make autonomous choices. There are good and bad choices, but we make these choices and we are not determined by our genetic makeup to decide how we decide in the world. If the determinists are right, then it's over. The game is over. And look, that Ptolemaic universe, that geocentric universe that you beautifully described, and that Aristotle instantiated in his spheres, do you know that that's how the world understood itself? That's how scientists understood the world for 2,000 years, Eddie. 2,000 years, that was the model. That's what Copernicus and Galileo overturned. But And there are atheists today, and they're given, they are in ascendancy, as you mentioned last week about the rise of the nuns, the rise of the people who say they're not religious. We must make a stand, and that stand is in defense of the human freedom of the will, which is our gift from God and what makes us like God. And it's that choice. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. B'chu chaim. That's what the battle cry is. B'chu chaim. And I do not believe people are determined. I don't believe that our genes determine whether we're kind or cruel. And I don't believe that the DNA decides every single debate that we can know. I mean, when you look at the most simple question, where in our body, in our genetic makeup, is our consciousness? It's not our brain. That's not our consciousness. That's a bunch of cells inside our skull. So you can't find it, but it's there. That sense of me is me. Where is that? And so there's evidence that's pretty obvious and basic and clear to me and to other religious people that we are more than just genetic goo. We're more than just genetic goo. We are beings made in the image of God. And we have to stop making that a kind of throwaway phrase. And we have to make that our battle cry against the determinists of our world.
So let's go back to the Torah for a moment, because this Torah portion then presents this very same question, but in a very vivid way. You have a confrontation between two men, between Moses and Pharaoh, and they live in two very different universes. Now, what's ironic, of course, is that Moses, having grown up in the palace, is a sort of, distant half brother or step brother to Pharaoh. They come from the same social world, as it were, but they see the world in very different terms. Here you have a Pharaoh who enslaves a people. That is, he takes an entire community, entire population, and uses them as means to his own ends, and sets himself hierarchically above them, and crushes them whenever it is necessary for his political ends. And you have a Moses who comes along and says, these are human beings created in the image of God, as you've articulated, and they have preciousness, they have value. And there is a God of the universe that demands, or rather, let's even leave God out for a moment, that there is an inherent value to human beings that cannot be compromised, and that compromising the inherent value of human beings will ultimately destroy this society, will ultimately destroy everything that you take as valuable. Excuse me. And the confrontation of these two ways of looking at the world, is what the Torah reading this week is really about. The God who reveals God's self to Moses is a God who holds each human being as precious. Pharaoh, who thinks that he is God, that he is hierarchically placed above everyone else and can use anyone he wishes to use in his way. Two sort of interpretations of how one ought to walk the world and where real power is located. But you see, Pharaoh's way is in some ways easier. It's a lot more efficient to have a strong man giving the orders, using people to get stuff done. It's a lot messier, as the Torah is going to tell us, to try to really embrace the unique preciousness of all human beings and to create a society which does so. And it's such an interesting confrontation. It's not just determinism, Marc. It's also a question of, as you said before, of the essential ethic that you put at the core of your life.
Yes, and it's perfect that he studied ants, because in an ant colony, individual freedom of the will is the destruction of the ant colony. The only way the colony can survive is with no freedom of the will, one strong person at the top. And if you cease to do your job, they throw you out of the colony. They kill you. Same as with a beehive. And that, that's the sort of communist theory of society, that you have a role to play. And what really our job is always to be the dissent against determinism and against the idea that freedom is an illusion. And what is the first thing that dictators do? They crack down on your freedom. That's the first thing they do. They try and get you to believe that you have no interest or there's no value in your personal autonomy, that what matters is the group, the team, the whole, the nation, the folk, for Hitler, the people. And so I think our job, and this is the great midrash on Moses that someday I'll write, that the Exodus is still going on. The Exodus wasn't an event in the past. The Exodus is a pattern. It's the Exodus pattern of the world, of forever. That's how it is. The struggle against Pharaoh continues in every age. E.O. Wilson was a fan of pharaohs. And we are fans of Moses and of God. And it's that conflict that the Exodus first gives voice to. And after the Exodus, then there's the struggle to enter the land. And after that, there's the struggle to survive in diaspora. And then there's world issues. But I think finally in our time, we are coming back around to really be in a position where we have to say to Pharaoh, let my people go. To the determinists of the world, let my people go. Let them choose the life that they want to choose, not just the lives that you say they're supposed to choose or that they're forced to choose. Give them freedom. And that freedom is God's gift. Whether it will work or not is really not important. What's important is that we struggle every day to be partners in God's effort to make it work.
And that's a beautiful sermon to begin the new year. So let me finish today. Let me finish today by asking you the question that every pundit on television has been asked all week, and we haven't had a chance to do it. It's the beginning of a new year, first day of a new year. When you look back at the year that has passed, 2021, what did we learn from this year? And what do we need to carry into the new year?
Well, for me, it's the rabbinic teaching, o chevruta o matuta, give me community or give me death. I mean, we can survive cooped up like animals in a cage because of the pandemic, but we can't survive for long. We need to be together. We need communities. And of all the communities we form, bowling leagues and golf clubs and other places, all the communities, the most important, the most enduring, and the most life-affirming is religious institutions, is the synagogue, the church, the mosque. This is what I've learned. We need to be together. And I don't believe that Zoom, with all of its benefits, is going to keep us together. It keeps us isolated. And so, although I've always thought that what I did as a practicing rabbi, what you continue to do so brilliantly at Valley Beth Shalom, I always thought these were important things to do. Now I believe they're critical. They're critical because in this past year, people have experienced profound loneliness, profound isolation. And the only solution to that is to find community. And hopefully the vaccines will give us enough space again to find each other. That's what I believe in the year to come.
And I would go back and echo. You mentioned Stephen Jay Gould, who was the opponent, as it were, the Balplukta of E.O. Wilson. And Gould, one of Gould's, if I remember correctly, and if somebody knows better, I apologize if I get this wrong, because I only read the popular stuff. I think one of his contributions to paleontology was the idea, or to the theory of evolution, was that a struggle for survival is not necessarily a struggle of the powerful to destroy each other and destroy the weak. That altruism was also something that found its place in evolution, and that if you study that if we study species, we discover that there's a lot more cooperation in nature than there is actually competition. And I think that's an interesting biological lesson that we could learn from this past year. I think that one of the things that disturbed us so much over this past year and the year before were all of those people who refused to help out. You know, the lady who refused to wear the mask on the airplane, or the fellow who stole all the toilet paper in the supermarket, or those who simply said, I'm out for myself and my own values, and I'm not interested in helping the other. And one of the things that the pandemic has done and continues to do is to demand from us a level of compassion and sensitivity toward each other. And to see that the basic American truth of individualism, which is a very powerful and important idea in our ideology as a nation, but it has to be equally balanced by an equally powerful truth of mutual responsibility, of altruism, of caring for the other, of compassion, of cooperation. Because if you don't have the two together, you can destroy a society. That's Pharaoh's ethic. Pharaoh's ethic is, I'm Pharaoh and the hell with the rest of you. And even at the end of the story, I'll give away the end of the story. When the plagues come, the 7th, 8th, 9th plagues, and the generals of Pharaoh come to him and say, it's time to let this go. You're destroying Egypt, and he won't let it go. The Torah describes it as the hardening of the heart. I think we've seen an awful lot of hardened hearts over the course of this pandemic. And I so pray that people understand that we're in this together and we'll end it together. The only way to get through this catastrophe is to do it together. Well, Marc, I wish you a happy, healthy 2022. Made it to the first decades of the 21st century. Stay well. Enjoy your family there in Florida. We'll see each other. We'll see everyone next week. Shabbat Shalom. Following this broadcast, of course, davening. We're going to be doing it virtually this morning, as we did last week, so that our crew can have the morning off to be with their family. This afternoon, davening at 5 o'clock. Tomorrow, 8:30 in the morning and 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Facebook and YouTube. And we return in person on Monday morning at 7:30. Take good care, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.